Oh boy.
Canada.
Canada.
Well, doesn't it derive from Agunyagahower?
Means village.
As Indigenous people, we are used to our stories getting a little twisted. So listen up as we set the record straight. I'm Ganyetio. Please join me as we hear from dozens of Indigenous people. Together, we will decolonize our words and our minds on the Telling Our Twisted Histories podcast. You can find episodes on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a CBC podcast.
God did not put us on this planet to suffer. God put us on this planet to laugh. Me personally, God put me on this earth to laugh. That's my job. That's my responsibility. You know, if I were to have a tombstone, that's what it would say.
This week on Unreserved, an intimate and joyful conversation with Tomson Highway. Danse, Anine, Boujou, hello and welcome. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. He is a world-renowned playwright, author, composer, concert pianist, and performer. And that's just the short list. Tomson Highway's accomplishments have been, well, astonishing. This Cree story master is the son of champion dog sled racer and caribou hunter Joe Highway and Belazie Highway, herself a renowned beater, Lapwichin baker, a kind of pudding cake, and mother to her 12 children. And now he's written a memoir, Permanent Astonishment. The first of what will be 5 books, Tomson chronicles the first 15 years of his life. And it just won the $60,000 Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction. And you can hear him already chatting in the background. Tomson, welcome, welcome. What word did I mispronounce this time?
You didn't mispronounce anything. You pronounced beautifully. The little mistake you made, and I'd hate to correct you because you know how perfect you are.
Oh, thank you.
You have a reputation for perfection. But this morning you said a lapachin. A lapachin is not baked. It's boiled.
Not baked. Well, it's a very complicated boiling sort of process.
Exactly. That's the nature of the argument in the
exactly.
In the book. Is a lapachin baked or because if it was baked, it would be called a cake, right?
Right.
But it's not baked. It's boiled, which makes it a pudding.
And there's a controversy that you talk about in your book.
Is a lapachin a cake or a pudding? To this very day, we don't know.
It's delicious either way.
It is. It's delicious. Yep. And next time I see you, I'll make you a lapachin.
Oh, I look forward to it. And then we will have the debate again.
See, it makes you laugh. And the second about like lapachin, it's a funny word. It just sounds funny, eh?
Well, let's talk about that because you start your memoir with a quick Cree lesson, sort of this pronunciation,
That's
cadence,
right,
syllables,
Mm-hmm.
but also you talk about the arrival of the French, and in particular their French names,
That's right.
and this hysterical like hybrid result of the two sort of colliding.
Yeah.
Can you share an example of that? For example,
I don't know if I can. Some of it is X-rated. Anyway, the letter L didn't exist in the Cree language until the French came. The French missionaries arrived in northern Manitoba in 1860, my great-grandparents' generation, and so we were Catholicized at that point in time. And but because they spoke French and not English, the letter L is very, very central, very important in the French language. Le, la, lapatine, la chouk. This is a la chouk, this hat. That's what they call it in French. So to this very day in Cree, we absorb these words. Mm-hmm. And that's where the L came into the picture. La messe is another one. Mass. When we in Cree we don't say you can say that I'm going to go and pray, but we say la messe nevitotan, which means I'm going to mass. I'm going to church.
One of the things that I found hilarious was the name changes. For example, Jean Baptiste. Tell us the ridiculous translation there.
When the French and the English languages arrived in northern Manitoba, and it was even in my generation, I was born in 1951, just before Christmas, almost 1952. The names were impossible for us to pronounce because we didn't speak French or English, so we just adapted them to our own tongue. And the French missionaries gave us French names, the names of French saints, when they baptized us. So a lot of people up north back then were called Jean Baptiste, for example, and we couldn't pronounce it as Jean Baptiste, so the closest we could get was Sam Baptiste, and because we are, because you laugh automatically, and because we are. Basically, Cree was not a written language until this generation of writers. We're the first generation to put it on paper. So we had to figure out a spelling for these things. And so I take liberties. I take poetic license to spell them the way I want to spell them. And so I spell samba cheese, samba, as in the Brazilian dance, and cheese, as in the food, as in a grilled cheese sandwich. So that's his name in the book, Samba Cheese. There's a Samba Cheese Fitzgerald in the book, for instance. And then we have names like Old Dice Chagazi is a Dene. She was a Dene. My village where I grew up, well, I didn't really grow up there, but our base was in Brochet, which is a village of about 800 people. And it was in those days, it was half Dene and half Cree. Because the Cree there had moved so far north, our Cree, that my father, for instance, so far north that they were actually living in Dene country, which is where I grew up bilingual in Dene and Cree. To this very day, I can still speak some pretty decent Chipewyan. Dene, they call it these days. In those days, we called them Chipewyan because we were like politically incorrect back in those days. But anyway, so old Daisagaze is an old woman who was an old woman, and she was adorable. She was my mother's favorite poker playing buddy. They played poker with a passion up there back in those days. And old Dai is Dene for pike, the fish, jackfish. And Sa means head. And Aze means woman or girl, and so her name was Old Sigase, which meant in English, Jackfish Head Lady. That was her name. But in order for people to be able to read that name on paper, we had to adjust the spelling. So it's old, as in O-L-D, one word. Dice, the second word, which is the little square thing that you throw on the table. It's a game, and Chagaze. So I spell her name Old Dice Chagaze. That's how it's written in the book. So there's an old woman up there, for instance, in my book called Old Dice. that's her name. And it makes you laugh automatically because they're all such silly names. They come out really silly and clown-like.
I just love it.
And it's a clown-like place. Reserves are clown-like places. They really are. People laugh a lot. And because the language is just so funny. Oh, my God, Cree is a laughing language. It's an hysterically funny language. So the first syllable, we start laughing immediately, and it's very interesting. As soon as the second you switch to English, you stop laughing automatically. I'll show you an example. For instance, when cherries first arrived in Brochet at the Brochet store, which is relatively recently, fruit like that, we understood that it was called cherries. But we didn't. We adapted it to our own language. So we call cherries to this very day. We call it Jeeries. See, you laugh
right away.
Yeah, and the expression on the face. Okay, look at my face. Okay, when I say cherries in Cree, we go Jeeries. And the movement of the head and the neck and all that goes with the rhythm of the language, right? Now I'll say the same word in English.
Cherries.
Exactly. See, it's boring. Your face falls. It's boring. There's no rhythm to it. There's no sexiness to it. I was going to say there's no sex to it, but that's not true. Well, let's not go there. We're talking about cherries.
Let's veer back this way, Tomson. Veer back this way.
That's the other thing about Cree is that Cree is much more comfortable with sexual talk than English is. In English, you're forbidden. Pleasure is forbidden. You're not supposed to talk about anything below the neck, the parts of the body, the most pleasurable parts of the body. You're not allowed to talk about them. And so it's a very, very serious language. It's a wonderful language in the sense that it's intellectual. It lives up here.
Yeah.
Munias. That's what I call them, the white people. I love white people, by the way. It doesn't look like it, but I do. I've been sleeping with one for 36 years, so I must love white people. Munias, we call them. Anyway, and even that I spell Moony, which is Mooney, and ass, A-S-S. Normally it's spelled in English, Moonias. There are people in Cross Lake, for instance, called Moonias. That's their last name. But I spell it Moony-as because it has a sense of humor to it. You think of somebody mooning you, eh? Don't you think? Isn't that what you think when you hear that word?
So in doing this, Cree sort of primer and then spelling these names in such a ridiculous, sort of absurd manner, it really helps shift the reader from an English perspective to a Cree one, which I thought was brilliant. How important was that to the story?
Very, very important. Cree English. We should call it Kringlish. Cree English. That's why I laugh so much. I laugh all the time. It's important to the story because the sense of humor and the act of laughing is central to the Cree culture. It's fundamental to the Cree culture. And so these missionaries came along, for instance, and taught us that we weren't supposed to laugh, that the reason for existence on planet was to suffer. The Catholic religion teaches you that you suffer, and the more you suffer in this life, the more you will be deserving of happiness in the hereafter, perhaps. And if you don't go to happiness in the hereafter, you go down there to hell, and of which there are graphic descriptions of what happens in hell, and they're terrifying. You're burned in the flames of hell for 10 trillion years, and you will never die. You will be always in pain and agony, and they threaten you with this information, and you get terrified. So death becomes a traumatic experience. And whereas in Cree, it's a different system entirely. The divinity that is central to our culture, first of all, is feminine because there's no gender in the Cree language. In Catholicism, in Christian culture, he's very much a man, and a heterosexual man at that, which puts everybody who's not heterosexual male in a very disadvantageous position, abusive position. So the first progeny that this amazing divinity had was the trickster, a clown. Mm-hmm. The first gift he gave to humanity was a clown. Okay, Wisagechak, we call him in Cree, and that's where the laughter comes from. So in the Cree context, in terms of the structure of the language, we are not here to suffer. God did not put us on this planet to suffer. God put us on this planet to laugh. Okay? Me personally, God put me on this earth to laugh. That's my job. That's my responsibility. So you can say that he came here to laugh. If I were to have a tombstone, that's what it would say. But I'm not going to have a tombstone. It says in my will, I have a will. They say that in English, where there's a will, there's relatives. And in my case, way too many relatives. I come from an immense family. I'm the 11th of 12 children. And anyway, wherever I'm traveling, wherever I happen to be when I die, just incinerate me wherever and just throw me into the ocean. Wherever I happen to be, or the mountain, or if I happen to be climbing my Mount Everest, just throw me on the mountain. You can throw me into the garbage if you want. I don't care. I won't be here. It's not my problem. But it's the cheapest way, the handiest way to do it, and the fastest way. And that's why my tombstone cannot say, he came here to laugh.
But we know. We know.
The sun is low, the sky is clear, though its blue is fading, which means one thing. Dusk will soon be upon us. The strait we are crossing looks like glass, for very little snow conceals its surface. This, after all, being early November and the winter blizzards yet to arrive. Mom is pulling a child-sized toboggan. Inside the box made of plywood that Dad has nailed there sits Renee wrapped like a stuffed toy. Me running along beside him. Also running along is Itchy, Renee's little salt and pepper house dog, whom he loves to a fault. Her pink tongue hanging, her breath puffs of vapor. Itchy Highway, as Renee calls her, returns that love heartbeat for heartbeat. Besides the sled dogs, who are always 8 in number, Mom always has a house dog. The only ones domesticated enough to be let into the house, or tent, and sleep there, eat there. These dogs are not so much pets as family members. They come in useful, says Mom. For instance, they warn her of foxes who have this habit of sneaking up at night and stealing pastillas, dried meat. They chase squirrels, they chase chipmunks, they make you laugh. Always black, female, and small, crossbreed mutt terrier types are her favorite. But Itchy is special. Her, Mom gives to her baby as a gift, something she never does, or will ever do again, with her other dogs. With Itchy loping happily along beside her master, we are rounding our third small island. Our cabin will come into view within minutes. when without warning, her eyes glinting with trickster mischief, Mom starts running and laughing and running and laughing. 45 years old that winter, she runs faster than a man half her age across that ice. And only gradually does it dawn on me why she is running. She is not alone in the act. Wolves have appeared to our right by 1/4 of a mile, and they, too, are running a half-dozen strong across that ice. The race is on. Encouraging Mom, Renee and I are squealing with glee until Mom, too, to our child's eyes, is a wolf, sleek, muscled, with fur that shimmers in gray and silver. And, in a light that tells us it's over, this day filled with wonder. Snow starts falling. Flake after flake as large as duck feathers and as weightless. It floats from heaven as gifts from God. Now singing in his chime-like soprano, his arms akimbo, crystals of snow turning to liquid on his angelic face, Renee flies along in a vehicle that is, at times, airborne. That's how fast Mom is running. In fact, she outruns her lupine competitors, fading to nothing. They are swallowed one by the subarctic darkness. And with Itchy yapping excitedly beside me, I run after Mom.
That is an excerpt from Tomson Highway's memoir, Permanent Astonishment. The audiobook is read by Cree actor and member of Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, Jimmy Blay. You're listening to Unreserved. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. My very special guest today is master storyteller Tomson Highway. Now, you grew up in the northwest corner of northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, and you describe it as just breathtaking wilderness of lakes, rivers, and islands. Tell me about the land that you grew up in.
Well, it's absolutely stunning. Nobody will ever see it because it's inaccessible. That area of Manitoba is 10,000 lakes, okay, large and small, and some of them are huge. Like Reindeer Lake is the same size as Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, but except that it has, they say, 5,000 islands. And you believe it when you see it. There's islands just because it's a very shallow lake, right? So there's islands everywhere. It's small and large, and a lot of them are surrounded by beautiful gold sand beaches. So it looks like Brazil, except that, of course, the season is very short. We had a summer season, but the wintertime too, it's equally beautiful in another way because you can. In the old days, when I was a child, we'd crossed it by dog sled, and when I was a child, we didn't have upward motors either, so we had to paddle across. So it would take 4 or 5 days to cross from Kinnassia to Brochet. But the things you saw were extraordinary. It's getting close to the tree line by this time, so the trees are very short. They're about twice your height at their tallest, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter as you go further and further north. And you have to portage forever and go from river to lake to river to lake, all without people, unpopulated by humanity. And then the trees get shorter and shorter, and after you get to the tree line, which is at about the Manitoba-Nunavut border, and all of a sudden there's no trees, and all of a sudden you realize that there's no place to go to the toilet.
Is that what you suddenly realized, really?
Well, yeah, you really realize it when you're looking for a place, right? So you walk. And even if you're like 5 miles away, you're still visible in the distance. It's a shocking realization when you come across the barrens, you call them. Anyway, it's stunningly beautiful and no people and pollution less without pollution. And the animals, we have herds of caribou up there. By the thousand. And then there's moose, and then there's beaver. Beaver is delicious. We ate loons. My mother used to make a beautiful loon stew. Oh, so good. My mother's specialty was campfire cooking because we lived outside all the time, right? Even in the wintertime, we lived in tents. And I was born in a tent in a snowbank. And like most people were in those days. It was very common to do that, further north of us, the people were born in houses made of ice. When you think of it. That's common. That was common back then. I know somebody who was born in May, up in the northern tip of Quebec, which is a beautiful area. In which they call it Nunavik, that area, the northern half of Quebec. It's Arctic territory, and up there there's no trees. The very northern tip, across from Iqaluit, And he was born in May when the spring had arrived. It was so warm that the igloo started melting. So they had to find a way of making the mother go into labor. And anyway, they got into the situation where he was almost born in a pool of water. It had taken longer to get born.
It might be a little more epic than your story, Tomson.
Anyway, so we have fabulous adventures up in that part of the world, and adventures not known to the South. You know, when you think of it, you know, most Munias, whom we love, know only a tiny, tiny string of the country that borders the American border. From Halifax to Toronto to Vancouver, 90% of the Canadian population lives there. So 90% of the Canadian population has never really seen the North, you know, has never seen our area, and they never will because it's inaccessible. You can't get there unless you have a lot of money and you charter a bush plane, which are very expensive to charter from Tomson. And it's like a 600-kilometer flight up from Tomson to where I was born. On every summer we lived on a different lake, or on a different island in Reindeer Lake, because we were nomads. And so as a result of this extraordinary country, I had a childhood. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is to tell the world that I had one of the most extraordinary childhoods in the history of childhood, you know?
Yes.
And the other reason was that I had the most extraordinary parents in the history of parents. I was the luckiest man on earth. I had a beautiful father and a fantastic mother. And that was piece of luck number 2. Number 1, being born there. Number 2, having parents like I did. And I wanted the world to know that parents like that exist on this earth.
6 feet tall, straight-backed, square-shouldered, a bull moose with antlers surveying his kingdom from a hilltop. His face is chiseled even if it shows evidence of youthful acne. Full, meat-like lips, a firm square jaw, an aquiline nose with slender nostrils, wavy black hair, thick black eyebrows that, at the same time, are just this side of bushy. Eyes that dance forever on the cusp of exuberance, of unbuttoned levity, that is Dad. Like all Brochet men of the time, he wears, when outdoors, a napagastutin, a flat hat. A pie-shaped hat of worsted wool with a button at the top and a visor at the front. His feet with moccasins asplash with color, beadwork crafted by Tomson Highway. Weightless footwear, they gave his feet the wings of birds. When not engaged in tricksterish endeavor, his eyes speak patience, and of kindness, humility, respect for God, respect for man. Never does he have an unkind word to say of anyone. If something or someone peeves him, a dark cloud floats across his face and then is gone. Never a preacher, his tacit lesson is, if you have something unpleasant to say of someone, say it to his face, or say nothing. Mom, on the other hand, is short and elfin, which doesn't nullify the fact that she is as strong and as supple as a length of rubber. Wire-like muscles and steel-like bones render her capable, even at age 70, of bearing a half-size canoe turned upside down up a hill on her shoulders, her hands gripping its gunwales, her head concealed in its hull. We have the pictures to prove it. Oval-faced, full-lipped, the forehead not quite as high as one would want it, but attractive still. A loon-like neck, though not, of course, quite as long. Eyes as mischievous as Dad's prank for prank. Her pièce de résistance is her legs, which are streamlined, fine-boned, the legs of a runner. When she stands on one leg with the other bent lazily at the knee, she gives the impression of verging on sliding into a waltz. Rain or shine, she wears a floral pattern cotton granny smock of tasteful colors. Emerald, magenta, sapphire blue, these are her favorites. The dress she herself has made, as with all Brochet women of the time, using her manual sewing machine and from materials she has bought at the Compagnie store. When finished, it comes to just below her knees, flows like a curtain, and is as finely crafted as anything one finds in the Eaton's catalog. A multicolored faux silk kerchief covering her head with ends tied loosely under her chin complete what, in essence, is a uniform worn by all Cree women of her time and place. Raised by kind people, she is kind, and, like Dad, nurtures her penchant for the ridiculous. "You want some of the coffee?" she will ask her husband of a given sunny morning to show off her English, which is non-existent. "You make the good coffee," Dad will answer, and will lance into the air a robust, full-chested laugh.
An audiobook excerpt from Permanent Astonishment by Tomson Highway. It was voiced by Jimmy Blay. You're listening to Unreserved. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. My guest today is world-renowned Cree storymaker Tomson Highway. You've described it as the kind of marriage you could only dream of in Hollywood. Can you tell me about Joe and Belazie Highway?
Joe and Belazie Highway. Belazie is the Cree pronunciation of Pelagie. Pelagie was a French saint, and so we adjusted the syllables to suit our tongues, which is why she was called Belazie. They were married for 60 years. It was 60 years of love, and beautiful, beautiful love. It was the best marriage I've ever seen in my life, bar none. And they had 12 children, and I was the 11th of 12. But the conditions up there were so harsh. They were cold. The Arctic is cold, and it's hard work up there. Fishing, for instance, where by September your hands start to turn blue because the Arctic waters are so cold, and the gloves that you wear are only partially waterproof. And so they had a very harsh life. So as a result, the infant mortality was very high. So the average family would have 12, 14, 16, 18 children. And my uncle Adam, my father's youngest brother, who just passed away last year at the age of 98, he was the last of that clan. He had 22 children, for instance. Most everybody had 12, 14 children. But the infant mortality rate was such that at least half of them would die. In my family, 5 of them died before I was born. So I didn't know them. But yeah, my parents lost 5 children, 3 as babies and 2 as young little girls, 7 and 9. So death was a constant presence in the culture, and it was not a scary situation. It was a beautiful passage to another form of life, and if you want to put it in biological terms. So they're up there somewhere, up there in the north to this very day, these spirits, I call them. And so the ones who survived, who were built very, very strong. And I was born, of course, naked in a tent in December, which 40 below weather. And to have a naked baby in a tent surrounded by snow, it had to be tough to survive that. Survival of the fittest. So I am the fittest of those 12 children. I can safely say I'll be 70 in 1 month. I'm probably the healthiest of those 12 children, the strongest. I can go forever, and I can eat tin cans, and I would not have a stomach ache. It's a blessing. That's another blessing. Piece of luck number 3 was to be born healthy, to have my health and also my mental health. I think I have a very good brain, and I use it. My father taught me how to use it. He was an extraordinary man. My mother was an extraordinary woman. They were funny, they were wise, they were kind, and they were strong. And the thing about having 12 children or 14 children is that you make all your mistakes as a parent with the first 2 or 3 or 4. But by the time you get to the 11th and the 12th, you have your parenting skills down to a fine art, right? So my younger brother and I, Renee and I, the youngest of the family, we had the best. We got the best of it. So we were raised like little princes of the North, and that's how we lived.
Renee and I are sleeping like teddy bears at the bottom of the boat, cushioned and covered, more than amply by a goose-down sleeping robe, duck-down pillows under our heads. And we are dreaming. At least I am. When suddenly I hear a voice. "Animanse," says this voice. "Uskoteo." Look, a fire. I wake up. It's Florence. I open my eyes. Her silhouette to me She is sitting upright, a foot in front of me. And she is looking out into the distance and pointing a finger through the wash of starlight at some campfire on some far island. It might even be that of the shaman, Usai Napeal, Yellow Man Hatchet, conducting a ritual to honor the eagles, the bears, and the spirits. What catches my eye hangs high above me. There, 10 trillion miles into that night sky shine 10 trillion stars. The arc of the dome they hang from flawless in its roundness. The only sound, a ripple. Paddles dipping in Reindeer Lake. Water swirling in response to their movement, then sliding back out, dipping in, swirling, sliding back out. As by a magnet, the silver light that is the sky reaches down for me, grabs my heart, and by such means pulls me up to a sitting position. And there in the water all around the drifting canoe and stretching out into infinity is the exact same dome of 10 trillion stars, a perfect reflection of the night sky above. But for that moment when I, in essence, am still half sleeping, still half dreaming, we are floating, my family and I, through the heart of this gigantic sphere made exclusively of the purest, most perfect of silver lights, winkin' and blinkin' and nod, sailing off in a wooden shoe to some far country, as a song I learned in grade 1 last spring goes. And I know then, at age 7, that no matter what happens to me in life, I will float through the orb of that privileged life, float, that is, through the heart of the universe in a little magic boat, illuminated by a chagwak, a trillion strong.
That is an excerpt from Tomson Highway's memoir, Permanent Astonishment. The audiobook is read by Cree actor and member of Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, Jimmy Blay. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. We're in conversation with Cree multi-talented creator Tomson Highway.
Oh boy. Canada. Well, doesn't it derive from Agunyagahower?
It's village.
As Indigenous people, we are used to our stories getting a little twisted. So listen up as we set the record straight. I'm Ganyetio. Please join me as we hear from dozens of Indigenous people. Together, we will decolonize our words and our minds on the Telling Our Twisted Histories podcast. You can find episodes on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
At the age of 6, a few months shy of 7, your dad put you on a plane, his face beaming with pride, and he mused in Cree, "I wonder what he is going to get down there." Marvels, 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 you thought. What opportunity was your father hoping for you?
Okay, my father came from a family of 12 kids, so far as I know. There's a bit of a shady spot there as to how many kids there were precisely. Mm-hmm. But there was 9 of them survived to adulthood. And he was the second oldest. And his older brother, Tomson Highway, that was his name, he drowned when he was 16 or 17. So, and my dad was 13. So what happens there with the family structure is that when the oldest is usually the one who stays home and helps their parents with wood cutting and fishing and all the rest of that, hunting, provide the family with food. That was their responsibility, the oldest one. So after that, usually the parents would afford to send the younger kids to school. So as a result of the drowning, my father became the oldest very suddenly, overnight, at the age of 13 or 14. So he stayed home. He was never sent to school because he had to help take care of the family. Whereas the rest, the younger brothers and younger sisters were sent to residential school, which at the time was in Sturgeon Landing, Saskatchewan, right just inside Saskatchewan from Manitoba, just south of Flin Flon, on the Saskatchewan River. And that's where the residential school was in those days, and that's where his brothers and sisters went. His brothers in particular, I know that. So they had grade 7, grade 8, grade 4, stuff like that, which is common in those days. And even the Munias back then, if you ask what kind of education their grandparents have in Europe, they probably say grade 4, grade 6, grade 8. It was common back then. And so my father regretted that he was never sent to school. He couldn't write, he couldn't read, he couldn't speak English, all that stuff. You should see, working, when you're fishing, okay, commercially, I started helping him fish when I was 11 years old. The summer I was 11. You had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I did that all summer long. From the age of 11, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to help my dad fish. It was very, very back-breaking labor all day long, no matter what the weather was, raining and sleet and waves as high as houses. You just kept on going. Me and my dad, because there were other boats with other brothers and relatives manning them, right? But my dad and I were together all day long from 3 o'clock in the morning onwards. And so it was back-breaking labor, and he didn't want us to live like that. You know, he wanted us to have a better life, an easier life. And the other thing was, he had lost so many children to death that he was determined that he would put his two youngest, his jewels, in a place where death wouldn't get them, because we stood a chance of dying too, any moment. And he would put us in a place where we would have good lives, we would have good careers, good jobs, all that sort of stuff. So he made a very difficult choice. And in those days, back then, residential school was not obligatory. Lots of parents kept their kids at home. My uncle Adam, I think he kept all 22 of them at home. 15 legitimate children at home, I think. I will have to verify that. And of course, he had 7 illegitimate ones, that's another story. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. Anyway, but that's how he ended up having 2 children. But I don't think he put any of them, he sent any of them to residential school. Yeah. And they were status. He was a highway, Adam Highway. Wow. And so he could have kept us at home, my dad, and he didn't. He put us on that plane and said, go to school, my friend. And he used to say, as we were fishing and rolling on the waves of Reindeer Lake with my father, you know, he'd say, "Ntai skola kida. Kispinkin ntai skola koesta mithas kipamatsuan." But I go up a good kapen. You can ask, Kimasnegan as you go ask, Kadutini Kimasnegan. I can't remember how you say turn the page in Cree. Ask or Michigan or whatever. And that's what he says. Well, you go to school, my son. Yes, you go to school, and you turn, and later on, when you're my age, you'll just sit at your desk. You'll just sit at your desk with your book, and every once in a while, you will turn the page. He'd say. I always remember that so well. And except that in my case, being the son of Joe Highway, he always said he had the touch of gold. Whatever Joe Highway touched, he turned to gold. He was the luckiest man alive. I still call it the luck of Joe Highway. I'm lucky. I have strokes of luck hit me all the time. Except that in my case, it's not just an ordinary book that I'm turning the page. Yeah. I'm sitting at a 9-foot Steinway concert grand piano, and I have one upstairs. It's a Yamaha, and I have a score in front of me. The book that I'm turning the page is a score by Sergei Rachmaninoff or Frédéric Chopin or Johann Sebastian Bach. And that's my life today. Yeah. If I hadn't gone to that school, today I would be a janitor or a garbage collector or even a taxi driver. Yeah. That would be the level of my work skills. Instead, today I am a concert pianist with a worldwide career who writes books on the side.
Absolutely. And that's on the side.
and that's what my father wanted for me. Yeah.
I love that. You're listening to Unreserved. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. I'm speaking to Tomson Highway about his award-winning memoir, Permanent Astonishment. Tomson Highway went to Guy Hill Indian Residential School, and his account of his time there is very positive. Some might say unusually positive. Not like the stories you hear in the news, stories that have been told by survivors in our communities for years. But then you get to chapter 37. We share this excerpt to bear witness to what happened to so many of our children. But a warning, this may be difficult for some listeners.
This all confuses us. We don't understand what is happening. Something about an institution and the power structure that governs its behavior silences us. We say nothing. We tell no one. Not our parents, not our siblings. We don't even talk about it amongst ourselves. For me, this whole experience is so beyond human experience, beyond human language, that I don't even think about the fact that this might be happening as well to Renee. To me, it's just touching. No physical aggression is involved. That's all I know, all I understand. The results are horrific. The men these boys grow into have nightmares for life. They are sexually dysfunctional. They don't know how to love. They don't know how to relate to other people. They have dysfunctional marriages marked by violence. They make dysfunctional parents. Their lives are destroyed. And they think about it and think about it and think about it. Sometimes to make the thinking stop, they kill themselves. And the fallout goes on to affect the next generation, and the next, and the next. The field is littered with dead male bodies. From what I understand, that is their experience. And one day I hope they write about it because I can't. And to those who can't, I have tried my best to write this story of survival for you. But why? Why waste my time thinking about something that happened 60 years ago? When there were so many people out there to fall in love with and be loved by. When there are so many people out there to thank for the love they've given me, my parents not least. When there is so much laughter, so much joy to be engaged in, so much music to dance to. When the very act of breathing for me is reason aplenty for permanent astonishment.
An audiobook excerpt from Permanent Astonishment by Tomson Highway. It was voiced by Jimmy Blay. Your father sent you and Renee to Guy Hill Indian Residential School, as well as Daniel and your other siblings. Yeah. And you remember your time there with fondness. The teachers, the rituals of religion, the children, all remembered and recalled with love. Mm-hmm. And that's not part of an experience that we often hear about. My own mother went to Guy Hill Indian Residential School.
I remember her, yeah.
And so was that an intentional choice to just recall the love and joy?
Well, first of all, I wasn't going to school for myself. Mm-hmm. I was going to school for my father. I was getting the education so I would go through anything for him. Mm. You know, there's an early chapter that talks about he's almost dying to save my life. Mm-hmm. When his foot gets infected, he gave me his life. You know, he suffered all his life for me, and he said that at the end of his life. He says, which means I've suffered many, many times for you to keep you guys alive. You know, so I was determined to go through anything for him, anything. And I've always been very well educated in terms of taking life by the horns. I have been raised to think always positively. So in terms of any negativity that may have happened, I don't think about it. I think one of the great secrets to happiness is to always think of others before you think of yourself. Mm. You know, it makes you very happy. Because the reverse works as well, eh? If you think of nothing but yourself first before you think of others, you will end up just making yourself miserable, and you will end up making the people around you miserable as well. So I don't do that. That's not my technique. Mm-hmm. I think always positive things, and that's all I have time for. I don't have time to think about myself. I think only about others, always. And the education that I have today, which is extraordinary, I went to school for 18 years, okay? I have 2 university degrees. The first one in Russia ever to have a university degree, period. So as a result, that's given me work skills that helped kickstart a native literature in Canada. You know, the existence of native literature today is in grand part as a result of an education like that. That literature would not exist today if I had not gone to school. You know, I mean, that's putting it in a very large, exaggerated fashion, but
no, it's true. Absolutely,
very much the case. So I put that education to very, very good use, and I contribute a lot. I play, for instance, with my piano playing, I play benefit concerts, mm-hmm. and I, for those of you who want a benefit concert, invite me to your community, and I'll raise $10,000 for you. You know, for your children's education, or for the Cree language program in your school. That's my specialty, preservation of the Cree language. I speak it perfectly. I write in it. I write books in it. I write songs in it. My next album coming out soon It's a country album. The first country album, my first country music album. I grew up in country music up north. We all did up north because all we had was transistor radios that operated on batteries. So we got all the at night, only the airways from Nashville, Tennessee. So we grew up with country music in our veins.
Absolutely.
So now I write country music in Cree, with the Cree language. So this album that's coming out by the end of November, hopefully, is country music sung totally in Cree. And I worked with the best musicians in the industry. And so the sound we got out of it was the Nashville sound.
Well, that is amazing. I can't wait to hear it.
Well, the music is, I mean, I wrote it, so of course it's beautiful.
Of course.
The music. I wrote the music and the lyrics, which I always do. And I do that because when I first started out in the industry, in the theater industry, nobody would produce my plays, you know, and that happens to everybody. So I produced them myself.
Yeah.
I spent my own money out of my own pocket, and I produced my first 6 plays by myself, and I became very, very poor. At one point, I was down to 1 servant, and at another point, I was homeless, and I was sleeping in a French basement next to the washing machine. That's the kind of poverty I went through in order to kickstart my career. And it was only when I was approaching 40 that I had my first success, and that was the rest history. And that was about 36 years ago. And it's still playing somewhere in the world. Yep, it's incredible. And all that money that I spent all came back in waves, you know. Now I have a beautiful house with 2 pianos. One of them, a Yamaha 7-foot concert grand piano in my living room upstairs. And I have a beautiful marriage, a beautiful partnership. And I have many, many beautiful friends, including yourself. And it's just a beautiful life. And that's what my father wanted me to have. He envisioned that for me, and that's what I have, and I have him to thank for putting me on that plane.
Yes.
I remember that moment precisely.
Yeah.
And I knew in my heart, and I could read in his eyes that I was going to have an extraordinary life.
And you had an astonishing life.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the title of the book is Permanent Astonishment, and it's a phrase that appears several times throughout the book. Many times. What are some of those things that keeps you?
Just 3 times.
3 times.
Just 3 times. I structured the book very purposefully. I had an extraordinary editor. I believe in the magic numbers 3, 7, and 11. Those are my magic numbers. So I structured it very, very consciously. Put the term permanent astonishment 3 times in the book. The first time is when we had pet eagles. I mean, who else gets to have pet eagles, you know?
Right?
Yeah. That's the truth. We have there's a photograph of them to prove it. When the summer I was 11, and of course they lived with us. They ate with us at the dinner table. We didn't have tables. We didn't have furniture up north. We ate on the ground, and we always lived on the ground with nature. And the table was a pile of spruce branches intertwined with each other on the ground, and we ate kneeling down or sitting on a low rock. And the eagles would come and sit with us on the ground, and they would eat raw fish, you know, as we ate our own dinners. And Mom had prepared on the campfire, which was right there. So at night, we'd dream about them, these eagles. As they got older, they'd fly off, but they'd always come back at the end of the day and sleep there at the camp. And so we dream about them. And so in this dream passage in the book where the 2 boys are riding the eagles, eventually they're floating high above the planet, and they see everything. And what they see is permanent astonishment. Yeah. And that's the first appearance of the term in the book. And then there's 2 other appearances later on, including at the very, very end.
Yes, the very, very end is actually where I wanted to end our conversation. Do you think you could read that if you have the book there?
Yeah, I brought the book on purpose for you.
Oh, good.
What page would you like me to read?
It's at the top of 312 when you first think your parents have abandoned you.
Oh, that part, yeah. Okay.
And then go to the bottom of 313.
Okay, so we got home from school, from boarding school. I call it boarding school because it sounds more positive for me. And we arrived in Brochure with all the other kids on a bush plane, on a float plane. You know, that's how. I mean, who else gets to go to school on a float plane these days? You know, even that was a privilege because I love flying. And landing on water, it's very, very special feeling. It's a smooth landing. There's no bump. Anyway, and so we got there, and normally the parents meet us at the dock. But in this case, our parents didn't meet us at the dock. Everybody got met, and everybody got taken home, except as we were standing alone on the dock. And then we think we've been abandoned, which is when I see Mary Rose Gunpowder, our eldest sister Vi's eldest daughter, and thus our eldest niece, even though she's actually 5 years older than me. The 20-year-old is lingering shyly on the little stretch of sand between the priest's corrugated aluminum-walled boathouse and the foot of his dock. And what she says surprises us utterly. She is taking us to Laughing Aunt Margaret's house, she says, where we will wait it out. Wait what out? I ask, puzzled. Another plane, she says. Another plane? Sure enough, there is another. God bless his kindness, but Dad has chartered a Cessna 185, which is the tiniest plane, to transport Renee and me the extra 150 miles from Brochet north to a lake called Clifton Lake, where we will be fishing this summer. So much Mary Rose explains as we walk to our Laughing Aunt Margaret's house. Mom's beloved younger sister, God bless her, has apparently pitched in to help with our lodgings, for the plane comes not today, but tomorrow. Located at the end of the village where it juts into the lake, this point we call Miniwatamik, her house stands between Mrs. Permafrost's character, little trading post with its jukebox, and the house where lives Filament Mosquito and her husband Archie. And lo and behold, early next morning, the little house that is Laughing Aunt Margaret's is buzzed by the plane that is so tiny it makes no sound, or just barely, and looks like a glider. Renee and I jump out of bed, jump into our clothes, grab our suitcases, and run to the dock, Laughing Aunt Margaret trailing behind us, cackling her signature witch-like laugh, which we love hearing. The point here being, the sons of Joe Highway and the sons of Joe Highway only are being given their own private plane to fly them home. And now two princes, the most beautiful man who ever lived, as many will call him in the years to come, and I, his clever elder brother, sit strapped to their seats, me riding shotgun, Renee behind me, and we gaze through the sunshine at the windless lakes and the forests and the trees and the eskers way down below us. Permanent astonishment, I think I will call this godly kingdom.
And the crowd went wild. Thank you, Tomson, for your time, your wisdom, this beautiful book, and the joyful way in which you continue to live your life.
I think we need that. People need a positive outlook. The only way we're going to survive this trauma that we're going through right now is to have a positive spirit. To be bitter and angry is a very unhealthy place to be. Mm-hmm. It'll make you sick. And it shows on certain people's faces, you know. Your lips start to develop these wrinkles or whatever. You start to hate, starts showing on your face. Mm-hmm. Just as love starts showing on your face. And we love in our hearts. We need a positive spirit to survive the trauma that we've been through and that we will be through again in the future. And that's why I'm doing it for my father. I'm going through life with a totally and utterly positive spirit.
Ganasc namin.
Yeah.
I go say. The celebrated Tomson Highway, his memoir, Permanent Astonishment, is the winner of this year's Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction. That's all our time this week on Unreserved. For more episodes, visit our website at cbc.ca/unreserved, the CBC app, or your fave pod place. This episode was produced by Aaron Knoll and me, Rosanna Deerchild. I'm your favorite cousin, coming at you from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory. Thanks for listening. Ganasc namin nawi. I go say.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.